Hey leaders, thanks for watching again. We're so glad to be back to normal youth group this Sunday night. We had a great time at our Super Bowl party last Sunday. Got to play lots of games with the students, eat some really good food. But we unfortunately didn't get a chance to watch the Super Bowl game because we had some internet issues. But for those of you that were here as adult leaders, thank you so much for your time that you put in sacrificing that night to be with students and playing games as opposed to being at your own Super Bowl parties. So I really appreciate that. Couldn't have done it without your help. This week we're launching into a new series called Judgment Call. But before we get there, as we do these videos, I want to add a little segment in the beginning that's some tips and tricks, something that you can try out this week, as soon as this week if you want, something you can put in your back pocket and try later when you might need some help or some tips for how to address a situation. So hopefully this will be helpful and just a little tidbit of some training, some new ideas for us as we continually develop our leadership skills together. So this is just some stuff that I've come across over the years that I've found helpful that hopefully you'll find helpful as well. For the next 11 weeks, actually, we're going to be looking at the art of asking questions. And there's 11 different topics on that and different things that we can use as we are asking questions and trying to dive deeper with our students during small group times. The first one we're going to focus on this week is the idea and the practice of thinking through the series of questions ahead of time. Now, we supply a list of these questions and a summary of the talk beforehand and a little bit of theology from Scripture, so you at least know what direction we're taking our students for the evening. So think through your own answers ahead of time so that you're familiar with how the session's going to flow, how the discussion and conversation is going to flow naturally. And sometimes we even are crafting the questions so that question 1 builds into question 2, which builds into question 3. So you kind of see that by the time you reach number 7, you're in a different place in the conversation than you were in question 1. So if you read through these questions and the discussion ahead of time, you'll know kind of what the end game is and what we're aiming for at the end of small group time so that you don't have to be as tied to that piece of paper when you're in small groups. You just kind of naturally can let the conversation go, but you know where we're steering it to. And then now your job as a small group leader becomes more of a conversation steerer than asking number 1, number 2 straight through, because you know how it's building, you know the flow, you know what we're going for the topic. Next week we'll talk about another aspect of the art of asking questions and how we can cultivate this skill of leading through conversation instead of teaching with our students. It'll be some really good stuff, so hopefully that's helpful for us. So as we continue, we're starting this new series called Judgment Call. And it talks about this idea that we all make judgment calls in every aspect of our days, in every aspect of our lives, where we tend to make the call between one thing or another, whether we realize it or not. So the truth is we all make judgment calls all the time in all sorts of different areas of our lives. Some of our students could be, it could be as easy as, should I eat Taco Bell ever? Like, is that a good idea? Should I ask her out? Should I ask him out? Should I watch American Idol or should I watch The Voice? Should I spend all my money on that amazing thing or should I save my money? Now, some decisions we run into get a little bit more difficult and get a little bit more real. It goes, well, should I quit that team or should I stick it out? Should I get in this car with this person or should I call my parents? Should I go to that party or should I stay home? Should I live with my mom or should I live with my dad? They all come down to this idea of what option is better. And that's just a part of life. Our students are facing some of those that I listed off as a real reality in their lives because there's difficult things happening in our lives every single day. And maybe it's because we're so used to making these judgment calls in every aspect of our lives, but the tendency to judge leaks into our relationships too. And that's where things get complicated because instead of thinking about which option is better, we start deciding what people are better. We all have an opinion about how the best kind of person looks in their lives, and we usually land on the conclusion that we are the best kind of person when we start looking at other judgment calls and looking at other people's lives. And the thing is, as good as judging others can feel to us, we know what the other side feels like as well. We know the other side doesn't feel so good when you're on the receiving end of it, and nothing about that experience feels good. Nobody likes when somebody else looks down on you or thinks that they're better than you. In fact, we hate it. We hate the feeling of being less than, of not being good enough, of being devalued. And when we see other people judging others and making those other people feel that same way, it makes us angry. We can't stand people who judge other people. And here's what we're going to really focus on, this idea that judging is easy. It takes no effort at all. We find ourselves doing it without even realizing it. And the reality of that is, and good news in that is, I think God knew that we would have a tendency to judge people. We would have a tendency to judge situations. And that's why Jesus made such a huge talk about that and made sure to address this issue very clearly. And so that's the story we're going to look at today in Scripture, or this Sunday in Scripture. The story is found in the book of John, and it was written by one of Jesus' followers. And it starts with Jesus hanging out at the temple and teaching a bunch of people who had gathered around. Now, in the middle of this teaching, he gets interrupted by a group of Pharisees. And Pharisees were like the top tier religious people in society. They obeyed all the rules, they did everything right. And because they were such good people, they took it upon themselves to point out all the shortcomings in other people. Now, the Pharisees were the best at judging. In fact, that's why they were slightly obsessed with Jesus. They spent 3 years that Jesus taught performing miracles and told stories and just followed him around looking for a way for him to mess up so that they could judge Jesus and make Jesus look bad next to their years of good behavior. So here's where we start. Jesus is in the middle of his teaching where these guys walk up and confront him in front of everybody. They brought a woman with them, and John writes, as he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. Now, this was a big deal on a lot of levels. For one, imagine the embarrassment and shame this woman felt being paraded in front of a group of people, and at the temple, no less. I mean, it was a pretty big deal, and everyone knew the Pharisees, Jesus, and the woman herself, that adultery was a crime punishable by death, by stoning. And so, of course, the teachers of the law feel it's their job to remind Jesus of this. They say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" Now, they really aren't looking for Jesus' opinion here. They're looking for Jesus to make the teachers look good. They're looking for Jesus to make the Pharisees look good. And they want to make her look bad. They're wondering if Jesus is going to validate their judgment call about this woman. Will Jesus treat her the way every other religious person thinks that he should? Will Jesus make the judgment call the law says he should? Now you can imagine everyone bated breath, holding their breath, waiting for Jesus' decision, but Jesus takes his time. He doesn't say anything at all. Instead, he stops and starts drawing in the dust. And this isn't satisfying enough for the teachers, so they kept demanding an answer. And it says he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." And he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. And we don't know what he wrote in the dust, but we know that Jesus called everybody out in that moment and said, "Let the first one who had never sinned, let the person who has a spotless record and whose conscience is clear, go ahead and step up." And from there we see when the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until it was only Jesus left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Did even one of them condemn you?" And what Jesus knew and wanted these teachers and other religious guys to know is that everyone is guilty. Everyone has a component that we are guilty of sin. We like to think that our sin's not as bad as their sin. This woman's sin was worse than our sin. Her stuff is worse than our stuff. But Jesus put everybody in the same category and said, no, we're all sinners. We're no better, and if we throw that stone, we're hypocrites. So in the story from Scripture, it doesn't take long before the woman noticed that nobody stuck around to actually go through with condemning her. Jesus said, "Well, neither do I. Go and sin no more." And Jesus, the only one who has ever been perfect and without fault, the only one who is really better because he's never done anything wrong, still doesn't pick up the stone. He still doesn't judge her, still doesn't pick up the stone to throw at her. Jesus has grace. Jesus has mercy in the middle of that. Now, 2,000 years have passed, but you and I still have the tendency to carry around some stones, don't we? We use gossip, we use sarcastic comments, we use indirect tweets and eye rolls and social media as our rocks, as our stones that we throw at other people when we have judgments on them. And so if Jesus were right, we're all guilty, we're all disqualified from the judging game. None of us have the right to throw a stone, and we're simply looking silly trying. So in light of our faults and Jesus' perfection, we have to drop the rock. So how do we do that? We stop measuring our sin and deciding which is worse. All that matters is that nobody is perfect, and that includes us. We got to spend less time thinking about others and more time thinking about ourselves. We spend so much time thinking about other people. What would it be like if we spent that time thinking about us? And lastly, we've got to start owning that we're a hypocrite if we think we're better than somebody else. It's like being a hypocrite when we pick up that stone to throw at somebody else, so we have to drop the stone. Now, this is a really big topic, and I don't mean for this to be talking down to or a slap in the face or anything like that, because we're all in this together, every single one of us. Jesus didn't say what he did for us to feel guilty or not good enough. We have to face the reality, and the church has to look at sometimes the ugly side of humanity, and that we have to look at the human condition and what we're facing, and that's what Jesus is calling us to do in this. Now, here's the beautiful side, and this is where we'll end for this week and talk more about it next week. The beautiful side of this story is that God accepts and understands that we're going to mess up. We're going to judge and we're going to be judged. But here's where grace and God's love trumps all. Jesus still accepted the woman even though he was the only person who could have thrown the stone. Now, he didn't throw the stone for her and he won't for you. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this series, is that if we can step back far enough and drop our stones and really believe and lean into God and the acceptance and grace that God has for us, what would it take for us to turn that grace and acceptance and love to other people that we tend to judge sometimes? So hopefully this will stir up some deeper conversation, some good conversation with you and your students. We will see you at 4:45 this week for our small group leader huddle. We're not going to be doing small group leader meetings like we've been in the past. We're trying to do all that in email form. It's largely informational stuff. In this huddle at 5:45, we're going to do prayer requests together. We'll share some wins together and any just little updates about the evening together. And then the last Sunday of every month, we'll take time to just get together at 4 o'clock and have an hour before youth group begins to spend time together. I'll have some drinks and some snacks for us there. We'll talk a little bit more in depth of the tips and tricks that we're looking at that week. But it's just a time for us to be social and in each other's lives and community together. So looking forward to that. We'll see you at 4:45 this week. Thanks, guys. See ya.